I'm going to keep this brief. Next month is going to be dedicated to the SCP series. So if you like that particular series, well, we got a whole month dedicated to it. We're also going to have a lot of guest voice actors. Nobody terribly famous, unfortunately, but a lot of good friends and fellow voice actors who do a pretty good job will be involved in the various projects, so you'll get to hear a lot of them throughout the month. Without further ado, I'm going to tell you a story that has actually mostly grounded in reality, unfortunately, about a place that's very local to where I live. This is called the Dejarnette Sanitorium. I feel that a frank opening is probably best here. I'm a writer. So far, only by hobby, but at some point I hope to be making it big off of my published works. I write a variety of work, but have a special attraction to writing towards the darker end of the spectrum. And this has been a talent that I've seemingly had since birth. Writing is not a difficult thing for me to do, when the muse is cooperative. Why am I telling you this? I mean, you know I'm a writer. Obviously, you're reading this. Plainly put, I wanted to be perfectly honest with you about what comes next. I won't say something as cliche as truth is stranger than fiction, although that is a phrase which I find all the more accurate with each passing day. What I will say is that for all my years writing fictional stories of boogeymen, I decided for a change to tell you something that is rooted primarily in truth. With that lofty preamble out of the way, I'm now going to tell you a bit of local history, and about a place that is very real, and haunted, if nothing else, by the memories of a dark past. In Stanton, Virginia, you can still find to this day the boarded-up remains of an old mental institution once known as the Dejarnette State Sanatorium, though most of the locals here just refer to it as Dejarnette's. You can see the building from the highway near the junction of I-81 and I-64. Just past the line of trees, you'll see a couple of acres of mostly open field, and looming back in the distance is the actual facility. Two enormous stone and brick buildings, about 5 stories tall each and a football field wide, and they're joined at the middle by a thin cement wall. In the middle of each building is a column-lined entranceway and great vented roofs that give the appearance of 2 distant reptilian eyes glaring at you across the void. The windows have been boarded up, and though you can't see this from the highway, all the doors are usually locked shut. The history to which I earlier referred is, sadly, quite legitimate. The facility was opened up in 1932 and named after, though not entirely founded, by Joseph Dejarnette. Anybody who has studied eugenics has probably heard this man's name, as he was a very vocal supporter. His most notorious feats included the once common practice of the sterilization of the mentally infirm. It would be unfair based on just this to call the man depraved, as again, this was the standard of the country at these times. However, there is much more that calls this man into question. In 1938, he once lamented the fact that the United States was not sterilizing enough people. He cited Nazi Germany as a favorable alternative. The direct quote reads, "Germany, in 6 years, has sterilized about 80,000 of her unfit, while the United States, with approximately twice the population, has only sterilized about 28,000 in the past 20 years. The fact that there are 12 million defectives in the U.S. should arouse our best endeavors to push this procedure to the maximum." Now, I realize to some of you, this might not seem that interesting. But understanding the history of this place is the same as understanding the history of this man. There can be no distinction. Something which I just learned recently was that Dejarnette was also quite the poet, and wrote a piece entitled Mendel's Law, a plea for a better race of men. An excerpt courtesy of Wikipedia. "This is the law of Mendel, and he often making it plain. Defectives will breed defectives, and the insane will breed insane. Oh, why do we allow these people to breed back to the monkey's nest, to increase our country's burdens when we should only breed the best?" One could argue both sides of eugenics for days, and as distasteful as it might seem for us now, the offending argument has the tiniest bit of ethical, if not necessarily moral, founding. But regardless of the lively debate that the humanitarian and authoritarian might have on the subject, the callous nature with which the scientists doled out an extreme measure against human beings cannot be justified. And it wasn't just enacted on those who were legitimately insane. The sweeping generalization for the word insane in those times was incredible. As a rather unfortunate example, this was a time when homosexuality was considered a mental disease. Those who were sterilized also included the feeble-minded, the sexually promiscuous, and even the poor. It didn't stop at sterilization either. Dejarnette believed that lower-class people deserved different treatments to those performed in the middle and upper class. While I didn't come across any official reports on the exact nature of treatments in Dejarnette specifically, it is well known that common treatments for schizophrenia at this time included insulin shock, ice baths, and of course, electroconvulsive therapy, more commonly known as electroshock. And that's not even scratching the surface of the unofficial interactions between the workers and the patients. While the ones performing the treatments were doctors, housekeeping staff, nursing staff, and ground staff had barely any standards at this time. Personal and archival accounts show a pattern throughout America's insane asylums of physical and sexual abuse. Some patients would be left chained to their beds for several days, and others would be forced to go without food or even water. And as for a patient's consent to experimental and untested treatment, it didn't exist. This hell on earth should already be scary enough without me having to go much farther. Even if you don't believe any of what comes next, you should know that everything that has preceded is a matter of public record. We don't need to create monsters, we are them. But as for what comes next, I can only leave to your judgment. I mentioned earlier that the doors are usually locked shut. However, even with its close proximity to the highway, that hasn't stopped the adventurers from going up to the place to have a look around. A few have even gotten inside. I'll start with my own recollection. My sister, my friend, and I once decided on a whim to go explore the grounds of the place. All I knew at the time was that it was a spooky old sanatorium and that it was a tradition amongst the more mischievous members of the area to go visit at least once. I took a camcorder with me, but like semi-intelligent trespassers, we planned this excursion in the middle of the night, so the footage is nearly useless. It was a cheap little flip camcorder, no night vision. I wish I could tell you I saw something incredible like the ghost of Joseph Dejarnette, or of his victims. Sadly, there was nothing particularly special about our visit that I can verify. That doesn't mean there weren't a few incidents. For one thing, you should know we didn't go inside, we just explored the grounds. We lacked both the tools and the nerves for a proper B&E. This was in mid-spring, and we reached the first building. All of a sudden, we felt a noticeable drop in temperature. It was as though I'd suddenly walked into a winter morning without a jacket on. My sister then claims that she saw two shadowy figures down the field from us, but that could have just been her imagination or the number of bushes that dot the field. What bothers me about that, though, was the way the shadows she pointed out to me were perfectly still. There was a light breeze that was causing the branches and leaves of the nearby trees to quiver, but these two shadows were stock still, seemingly unaffected by anything. The strangest thing we passed was a gnarled, dead tree in the middle of the grounds, on the bark of which you might still be able to find what looks like deep scratches. When I passed by here, I definitely recall hearing a whispering sound, and I asked my sister and friends what they were saying. When I realized that they were in front of me, but the whispering had definitely come from behind me, I got a little freaked out. Again, this is not officially verifiable. I don't expect you to believe my account. But I'm not the only one who has ventured in. You can find better footage on YouTube for those lucky enough to get footage. People who have had a chance to go inside this place have reported a number of unusual sightings. One person claimed to have heard a shrill, saw-like sound when he entered one of the patients' rooms. There was another report of whispering, but this was inside, and there were several voices whispering to each other rather than one. Shadowy figures can often be seen on the video from YouTube, although how legitimate these are is up to your own skepticism. I asked another friend of mine to share his story with me, and it's with his account that I'd like to get this out. For sake of privacy, let's just call him Dave. Dave decided to actually try and get inside, rather than our half-hearted grounds exploration. Unlike the others who have ventured in, however, Dave went in all by himself, with no correlating witness. You might think that I'm just ending on my weakest account. All I can offer is my assurance that Dave is an honest person. I am convinced of the legitimacy of his report. He found a door in the small midsection of the building, which served as an emergency exit of sorts. The night he went, this door was not locked, although a padlock was resting near the door with a large chunk taken out of it. Somebody had clearly gotten to it with a bolt cutter, perhaps just earlier that week. Inside was nearly pitch black. Dave, however, was a virtual Boy Scout when it came to this sort of thing. For the record, Dave has never broken into anybody's house, but when it comes to abandoned buildings, he fancies himself an urban salvager. He had a handheld flashlight, the kind that's just a small rubber cylinder and creates a perfectly circular beam of light. He had a much larger mag light for when he got inside, a pair of bolt cutter, which he left outside, some rope, spare batteries for the handheld, and a cell phone. He said that the inside was absolutely frigid, not entirely unusual as his visit was in late January. He moved through the hallways towards the building on his left side, and it seemed to get even colder. As he entered the remnants of the main foyer, he said that he too began to hear the whispering that many people, including myself, had reported. As he looked around, he saw an old, mostly shattered mirror, which had dark brown stains on it, seemingly of coagulated blood from many years prior. A door opened just behind him in the mirror, which caused him to spin around and call out, but the only answer he received was a cessation of the whispers. He then did something that, he admits, was incredibly stupid in hindsight. He fell into that oldest and most asinine of horror tropes. He went into the room that had been opened. This room was clearly once an office. Most of the furniture was removed, and of course, what remained was almost completely shattered. Yet, it was a small room with only one entrance, and a large, boarded-up window which pointed to this obvious conclusion. Sitting on the most level and rubble-free part of an old desk, he saw a few sheets of paper. These were much newer and obviously left behind from one of the last parties to go wandering into this place. The papers were just printed off histories from a variety of sources, but it was the sheet at the very end that interested Dave. It was Mendel's Law, handwritten on a sheet of notebook paper. As he read it, the whispering seemed to return. It was when he got to the last line that the whispers seemed to be right in his ear, as though somebody was standing right behind him and over his left shoulder. He even claims he felt the breath on him as the dead voice whispered along with his mind's eye, "When we should only breed the best." He bolted, as I don't doubt anybody else would have. There's no big twist ending. What happened to him scared Dave enough to the point where now he doesn't even like to visit Stanton. I don't blame him, and I'm very glad that I never went in. Whether or not you believe the place is actually haunted by the tortured souls of its former residents, the human lives that were utterly destroyed in this place remains the true source of horror. The pattern of abuse that people in need of help receive throughout the years is what has spawned nearly every horror story to date on the subject of asylums. Hell is real, and it was forged by human hands.